Well, good morning, everybody. This is Barry Jones with SP History. Today we're beginning episode 3 in our MLK series. And if you have stayed up to date and watched episodes 1 and 2, in episode 1, I laid out the government case. It was pretty convincing. A lot of evidence. A lot of it was circumstantial, witness testimony, but there was some physical evidence too to indicate that James Earl Ray was indeed the Martin Luther King assassin. Then we began looking in episode 2 at the counter investigation, the investigation by James Earl Ray's, I hesitate to call it the defense team because he'd already pled guilty and he'd already been sentenced. But 10 years after, we talked about a meeting that was had at Brushy Mountain Prison, whereby Dr. William Pepper met with the current lawyer, James Earl Ray, and a bunch of other people, interviewed him, and came away believing that James Earl Ray was innocent, at least of a knowing role in the assassination of Martin Luther King, at least of a shooting role. They were unsure if he had a knowing role in some other capacity. So they spent the next 10 years, William Pepper did, spent the next 10 years investigating that. Meanwhile, James Earl Ray kept asking him to represent him. He wouldn't represent him until he was convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt in his own mind, that James Earl Ray did not have a knowing role in the Martin Luther King assassination. When he came to that realization in 1988, he agreed to represent him. So, total, that's taken 19 years to get to that point. And in that investigation during that 10 years where he was trying to determine if he had a knowing role, Pepper made some discoveries, some pretty startling discoveries, which we went over yesterday. Chief of which is the fact the FBI was finagling behind the scenes for years before the assassination to set it up. That J. Hoover had a relationship with Dixie Mafia personnel in Memphis, Russell Adkins and Russell Adkins' son, Tyler Adkins, that they paid off, requested and paid off the commissioner of the Missouri State prison system and also the Missouri Penitentiary there in Jefferson City to profile their prison population, find somebody who would fit the role of a patsy, psychological profile of a patsy. And of course, they came up with James Earl Ray. And then the prison warden was paid off to facilitate his escape from prison a year before the assassination. So they were starting in 66, after they'd made a decision to assassinate Martin Luther King, they were also preparing the patsy. And so we went through some of the testimony and evidence that William Pepper was discovering and the timeline and how they were coinciding. And we're going to continue that today, that look into what William Pepper has found out in his investigation. And you're starting to see a counter narrative emerge. And some of this evidence, none of this evidence made it to trial because it was all tied off when James Earl Ray conveniently pled guilty. We talked about why he pled guilty. He was forced into it. He was pressured because the alternative was execution. And the promise was he'd get a new trial. But the state never gave him a new trial. I mean, they fought it and fought it and fought it. And his lawyer had even written him a letter saying, I'll pay the first $500 down to you retaining a new lawyer so you can get that new trial. And, the psychological profile is important about James Earl Ray because it told a story about him. He was not a criminal mastermind. The government said he was. He was not a racist. The government said he was. He was not wise in the world as far as how these things operate. He was actually very naive. He was kind of a bumbling idiot when it came to crime. Anyway, he was somebody who could be manipulated, controlled, somebody who could be set up as a dupe. And so this is what William Pepper is discovering. And so we're going to continue with that discussion today. I won't review all of the source material. You've gone over that several times. I want to get right into it. This is an important figure in this whole investigation. William Pepper is undertaking. His name is Frank Holloman, and he is going to be instrumental in this whole assassination plot. Turns out, well, I don't want to put the cart before the horse here, but one of the things, we talked about this yesterday, the decision to assassinate King happened in 66, but it took a while to determine where it was going to happen. If you remember, the contract was first offered to the New York crime family, the Chicago crime family, uh, others, and they all said no. But the one who said yes was in New Orleans, Carlos Marcello. And Carlos Marcello delegated it or shipped out the contract to one of his underbosses in Memphis, and Frank Liberto. And Frank Liberto takes the contract and he begins setting in motion the the contract, the hit on Martin Luther King. It's going to happen in Memphis. So if the hit is going to happen in Memphis, it's going to be really important somehow to lure Martin Luther King to Memphis at the right time when the contract or when the hit is ready. And so it becomes part of it reminds me so much of JFK, where LBJ and Governor Connolly lured JFK to Texas, specifically to Dallas. You gotta, if you can't get the target next to the shooter, you gotta bring, if you can't get the shooter next to the target, you gotta bring the target next to the shooter. And it's been determined that the shooting is going to happen in Memphis. So you got to get Martin Luther King to Memphis. So on February 1st, 1968, which is just a couple months, talk about February and March, he's assassinated in April. So 2 months before the assassination, two garbage workers, E. Cole and Robert Walker, were killed. They were sitting in a garbage truck in the back, which is something that they oftentimes did. They're riding around doing their rounds. Anyway, in this case, the truck malfunctioned and it ground them up into little bits in the garbage packer, and it obviously killed them. It was a terrible tragedy, and what Pepper discovered in his investigation, that this was actually planned in advance. This was not an accidental death of these two men. It was a murder, a planned murder by the Dixie Mafia family, Russell Atkins, his family, in coordination with the chief of Memphis Fire Department and police and fire. His name is Frank Holloman. Frank Holloman is retired FBI, only 3 or 4 years prior. This isn't J. Edgar Hoover guy. Now, if you remember, it was J. Edgar Hoover who decided in '66 that Martin Luther King had to be killed. He was the one who set in motion all the goings on in the Missouri penal system to set up the patsy. He was the one who offered the contract to the New York crime family, to the Chicago crime family, and ultimately to the New Orleans crime family. He was the one that sent and paid off through his number two, Clyde Tolson, all of these people that are working on his behalf, whether there be Dixie Mafia or Italian Mafia or like in this case, Frank Holloman, one of his guys strategically placed in Memphis as head of the police department and fire department, same as Frank Holloman. So this was an organized murder to cause, obviously it's a heart-wrenching situation, and it's going to lead to a garbage worker strike. Of course, if you remember, we discussed the Poor People's Campaign and how Martin Luther King and his accomplice in this whole Poor People's setup was Dr. William Pepper, and their whole plan was to launch the Poor People's Campaign from Memphis. When they went there, this was decided upon once the garbage workers went on strike. Nobody represents a poor people campaign better than garbage workers, and so they were going to translate the garbage strike into a poor people's campaign. It was going to start in Memphis because that's where the strike was. And the strike was initiated because there was no workers' compensation for the families, these two men who were murdered, that neither one had any life insurance. The city paid them $500 to help pay for the funerals. That's it. And so you have this outrage by all the other workers who are seeing this in the city of Memphis, all these poor people. You got this war going on. It's just a very terrible time in the city of Memphis specifically, but in the country, generally speaking, because of this war. And now you have this. And it caused or set in motion a series of events that led to this strike, which, of course, Martin Luther King is going to be enticed to come be a part of and march with these people because, as I said, nobody represents poor people and a poor people's campaign better than garbage workers. And the deaths, which were manipulated to happen by Frank Holloman and the Dixie Mafia folks, the Russell Atkins and his family, helped set all this in motion. So this was a planned murder. And this is something Dr. Pepper learned. So on March 18th, we talked about this yesterday, MLK comes on his first trip to Memphis and he gives that big speech, famous speech at the Mason Temple. Anyway, this strike occurs. MLK comes to Memphis and he promises to return on April 3rd to support the garbage workers. They were striking for better pay, better working conditions. They wanted union recognition, et cetera, et cetera. During the time that he was there on his first trip, he gave another speech, famous, all labor has dignity. That's the famous I am a man speech where African Americans, in their desire for equality, are also, as far as voting rights are concerned, and their treatment in the larger sense in society, we're also desiring some sort of equality in the workforce, the way that they're treated in the workforce. And of course, nothing better represented the way they were exploited in the workforce than what just happened to their two friends in this garbage truck. So obviously this is a major story and a lot of eyes are on it. So Martin Luther King is going to be lured to Memphis. He's trying to start a movement, and where better to go to start this movement? It's going to culminate in Washington, than a place where there's a lot of controversy, there's a lot of eyes on, there's a lot of media attention, and they knew this, which is why they set this in motion. So meanwhile, and I'm kind of going back and forth between what he's doing, what other events are happening around us in the country at that time. 2 days prior to Martin Luther King's big speech there in Memphis, RFK announces his intentions to challenge LBJ for the Democrat nomination for president. He says he's going to run for president. This is after several primaries have already occurred. LBJ's electoral weakness has been demonstrably obvious to everyone who's paying attention. People are so upset about the war and blaming him for it. He initially was not eager to challenge LBJ, the sitting president. He's going to be the dutiful party member and support his president. But once he realized how weak LBJ was electorally, he finally gets talked into running. He announces that decision on the 16th. On that same day, we now know, according to FBI documents, that J. Edgar Hoover notified LBJ that RFK was reaching out to MLK to advise him of his decision in advance to ask for his support. So in this, now, of course, they're best friends. J. Edgar Hoover and LBJ, they're tight. They're neighbors in Washington, in a suburb of Washington. They've been neighbors for a long time. They're friends. They work together. And so J. Edgar Hoover oftentimes looked out for LBJ. And you remember, it was LBJ who appointed J. Edgar Hoover FBI director for life after JFK's death. So they're pretty tight. So Hoover goes to LBJ and says, hey, RFK, your avowed enemy, is going to throw his lot into the ring, and he's asking for MLK's support. There's a possibility these two might team up. 2 weeks later, LBJ holds that famous press conference, announces he would not seek re-election. Presidents do not do this when they can run for re-election, number one. Number two, they do not do this unless the internal polling shows that they would lose. If he was If if the internal polling showed that he would win, he would have run. LBJ's sole ambition in life was to be president. He was obsessed with being president. He's in the middle of a war. This candidate that's running against him is an anti-war candidate. The last thing he wants to do is turn over his party to someone who is going to completely throw out his policy, replace it with his own, do the opposite. Presidents are obsessed with legacy, right? And his legacy would be that, if he loses the RFK and RFK ends the war, he's going to get the credit, and LBJ is going to always have to blame for the Vietnam War. He wants somebody, if not himself, he's going to want somebody that's going to continue his policy, win the war, so they both get credit. But it's interesting that 2 weeks after RFK announces, and Hoover tells him that RFK is reaching out to MLK, 2 weeks later, LBJ announces he will not seek, nor will he accept his party's nomination for re-election as presidency. I mean, it was earth-shattering news. But you can kind of see when you look at the timeline, what's going on behind the scenes, why he made that decision. His polling told him he was going to lose. And he was going to lose to RFK because RFK was the anti-war candidate. He's a Kennedy, and now he's reaching out to MLK, which means he's going to get the black vote. He's at that point in time, it looked like he was going to be an unstoppable force. And so LBJ has to recalibrate and figure out if I can't win, how can I manipulate this in such a way that my policy at least wins? I might not be able to continue as president, but I might be able to help somebody else stand in for me in my place, who the people won't be so opposed to, and could beat RFK in his association with MLK and continue my war policy. All right. Remember that in the back of your mind as you go forward. On April 2, 1968, fast forwarding now. So here we are. We've come through March, and now LBJ at the end of March announces he's not going to seek re-election. Literally 2 days later, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover sends out issues a memo ordering all FBI surveillance of MLK to stop. Now, when we get into this later in one of these later episodes, I'm going to go through all of the COINTELPRO surveillance and stuff that's been ongoing from the FBI towards MLK for years. And it's right straight from their documents. It comes out in the 70s as a result of the church hearings. That's when we learn about it. At the time, in the 60s, nobody knew this was going on. We learn about it in the 70s. But this is an internal memo from MLK to all of his stations and departments to stop auditory and visual surveillance of MLK on April 2nd. This is 2 days before the assassination. So they've been following him around, surveilling every move he makes, bugging his phones, wiring his hotel rooms to eavesdrop on all their conversations, bugging their cars, paying off informants, infiltrating the inner circle, just to always know what MLK is thinking, what he's saying, what his next move is going to be. They're always looking for compromising information to blackmail him. We'll get into it. It's a whole raft of things. It's the rat fucking. That's what COINTELPRO is. It's rat fucking internally of MLK's organization to discredit the organization, the movement, and ultimately to discredit Martin Luther King. But 2 days prior, 2 days after his buddy announces he's not running for president, 2 days later, he announces or sends a memo out, stop observing, stop surveilling MLK. And 2 days later, MLK is assassinated. Folks, that is not a coincidence. You have the announcement of RFK. You have, on that same day, Hoover goes to LBJ, says, hey, they're working together. 2 weeks later, LBJ drops out. 2 days later, Hoover says, stop surveilling MLK. 2 days later, MLK is assassinated. Now, it doesn't stop there, right? That was April 4th. on April 27th. Now, remember what I said, it's all about preserving the policy. If LBJ can't win, because he has become identified with the Vietnam War, somehow we got to manipulate the situation so that somebody can be my placeholder who will continue my policy going forward, and my legacy will be preserved. So on April 27th, LBJ's vice president, Hubert Humphrey, announces his candidacy for president. Now, Hubert Humphrey is essentially the placeholder that I'm talking about. He is the guy that's going to continue the war policy. He is LBJ's handpicked successor. If it can't be LBJ, then it's got to be somebody like LBJ, whom the public won't maybe blame or hold responsible for everything that's happened. They'll vote for him, and it's got to be somebody strong enough that can beat this RFK juggernaut, if RFK even makes it. Which, of course, June 8th, a month and a half later, RFK is assassinated. We talked about this and how important it is to clear the field of fire. And I used as an example many times before in my videos how the CIA and the Secret Service worked together to clear the field of fire in Dallas so that there were no other casualties, no other victims. Now, it didn't completely work because Connolly was a victim. James Tague ended up being a victim, and that complicated things and caused the need for the magic bullet, right? But by and large, in a place that is very small, Dealey Plaza, that whole field of fire could have been crowded with people, but they weren't. The Secret Service had folks moving people, sort of exercising crowd control to keep that field of fire from the grassy knoll open, to minimize any other damage, any other collateral damage, which would complicate the narrative. They didn't have to worry about clearing the field of fire from above because the Texas School Book Depository was 6 floors up. You could shoot over the heads of everybody. You didn't have to worry about so much from the criminal courts building, the records building, or Dal Tech's building. But from the grassy knoll, people would be standing right in the way of the field of fire, and boom, now you have an extra victim. So clearing the field of fire is key in Dallas. Clearing the field of fire was also key in this whole deal, right? The RFK announces he's running for president, and he instantly becomes a front runner, or at least equal to LBJ, especially when they find out that he's working with MLK and he's going to get the black vote. All right. So clearing the field of fire means, from LBJ's perspective, okay, I got to take myself out and insert somebody else in who will continue my policy, and then we'll deal with these other two later. And sure enough, on April 4th, MLK is eliminated. There goes the black vote. And on June 8th, RFK is eliminated. There goes the juggernaut. And the only man left standing is Hubert Humphrey for the Democrat nomination, who is essentially LBJ. And he's running against, they had another anti-war candidate far left who was considered to be unelectable. So the path has been cleared for Hubert Humphrey to slide in there and become LBJ's stand-in replacement to be the Democrat nominee and continue the Vietnam War policy. These are not coincidences that these events happened in the sequence that they did, the way that they did, because the desired result was to clear the field of fire, clear the field of all the anti-war people, and insert into the place the pro-Vietnam War policy, the continuation of LBJ's policy. If it can't be LBJ, it's the next best thing will be Hubert Humphrey, his handpicked successor. And that's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. On August 29th, 1968, LBJ's stooge, Hubert Humphrey, is nominated officially for president. And what that means is we're going to have a continuation of LBJ's Vietnam War policy if he wins the general, which, if you know how history unfolded, he lost by less than 1 percentage point. It was very close. This whole subterfuge, this whole manipulation of the electoral system almost worked. It involved 2 assassinations. It involved stand down of one president in a replacement of the vice president in his place, all in an effort to continue the Vietnam War. Pretty amazing. Now that's just using the timeline and using deductive reasoning. That's what happened. That's exactly what happened. Okay, I told you yesterday I introduced you to the idea that once James Earl Ray escaped from that Missouri prison, of course, we all know that escape was set up. It was facilitated by the warden. He doesn't know that. Now there's a year before the assassination is scheduled to take place in Memphis. So they've got to protect their patsy this next year. And we talked about the selection of an alias and how that alias came to James Earl Ray. Now, he never admitted that this handler gave him the alias because he was very loyal to anybody who thought he thought was trying to protect him, trying to help him. But it's pretty apparent, to put the pieces together, the puzzle pieces, that John Downing, head of the 902nd Military Intelligence, Army Military Intelligence, Washington, selected the name from a real person who had top secret security clearance and sent his number two, just like FBI director was always sending Tolson his number two. He sent his number two up to Canada to talk to the real Eric Escall and to let him know, hey, we're going to use your name, your identity, for this counterintelligence operation. Just play along. And the person by whom or through whom this alias came to James Earl Ray was his handler, who was working with John Downing in military intelligence. His name is Raul. This is the name by which James Earl Ray was introduced to him. That's the only name he had for Raul. And Ray tells the story to Pepper that after escaping from prison, he met Raul after he escaped across. Remember, he escaped for. He left the country. He was trying to get out of the country, out of North America entirely, but he needed a passport, and that means he needed papers of an alternate identity that were legit enough that could pass muster and get him a passport. So he's in a bar in Montreal. He's trying to flee to Europe, but he doesn't have the documents he needs. He needs these papers. And he meets this guy who introduces himself as Raul at this bar. Now, he thinks this is an incidental meeting. This is not an incidental meeting. Raul, these intelligence figures, facilitated Ray's escape from prison and have been following him and surveilling him, monitoring him ever since. So this was not an incidental meeting. This was a setup. So Raul meets him in this bar. And by the way, Pepper got corroboration that Raul was in this bar at the same time that James Earl Ray was in this bar. There was a British merchant seaman who was also at the bar, had a conversation with the same guy named Raul, who was introduced to him by the same name. He said that the seaman told Pepper that Raul tried to sell him some weapons. That's how he remembered him. So we have independent corroboration by a British seaman at the same bar at the same time that this guy who claimed to be Raul was there, because he had a conversation with himself. So anyway, Raul was having a conversation with Ray, and all this comes up about him needing travel papers. Raul tells Ray, I can get you these travel papers if, in exchange, you do some jobs for me. And according to James Earl Ray, the jobs that Raul needed him to do involved gun running. And he said, I can get you the travel papers you need. You'll get your passport and you can flee to Europe. You just need to do a couple jobs for me. So James Earl Ray agrees to this deal, essentially. And on his first job, Raul sends him back across the border, back into the South, into the United States to Birmingham, Alabama. And he says, I need you. He gave him money. He said, I need you to buy a rifle and a car. Excuse me. So he goes across the border on March 29th and 30th, 1968. Now, understand, let's go back and look at this. Raul has escaped from prison, and during the course of this time away, he meets this guy, Raul, in this bar in Montreal. And Raul gives him this story that he'll give him the travel papers if he'll do some jobs for him. His first job is March 29 and 30, 1968. This is 4 days before the assassination of Martin Luther King. So he just kind of keeps him on a string. And then when it comes time for the operation to commence, he sets it in motion. He sends James Earl Ray down to Birmingham to buy this gun. It's kind of an interesting story what happens in the purchase of this gun. If you remember the psychological profile of James Earl Ray, according to the report, James Earl Ray did not show a proclivity or an aptitude with guns, with weapons. He'd fired a .22 when he was a teenager. He'd taken some weapons training when he was in the Army, but he was always mediocre at best. And this is illustrated by his purchase of this gun. He goes down and he buys the wrong gun. And then, according to him, he gets instructions that night on the 29th to go back the next day, trade it in, get the right gun. This time, Raul gives him specifics. He says, you need a .30-06 caliber Remington Game Master. And I don't care what kind of car you buy, just get a car. So with the money that Raul gives him, because James Earl Ray didn't have any money, so Raul gives him money, and he buys this white Mustang. And that's what he uses to make this trip down to Birmingham and to buy this gun. And eventually uses the same car to drive over to Memphis. According to Ray, Raul told him, after you purchase the car, after you purchase the gun, meet me in Memphis on April 3, 1968, which is the day before the assassination. So this is just a matter of days. So Raul has been his handler during this period of time. He has earned his confidence and his trust because he is getting him the travel papers that he is going to need to flee the country. But before he can flee, he needs this job done. And so James Earl Ray is honoring his commitment. After the assassination on the 4th, James Earl Ray immediately flees to Atlanta. Then he ends up in Toronto, and those papers that Raul got him, he uses to get a passport, and he ends up in London. That's where he gets caught. So Raul has already fulfilled his end of the bargain. He has, shortly before his trip to Birmingham, he has given James Earl Ray the papers that he is going to need to flee. And he's going to use, and it's got the alias on it. It's got everything. And of course, Raul is working with intelligence. So intelligence is going to know everything that's on these papers, the alternate identity, the alias, everything, picture ID, everything they're going to need for the wanted poster after the assassination. They are essentially creating the wanted poster in advance and giving it to James Earl Ray in the form of these travel papers that he can use to get a passport. It's all being set up. Oh, and one last thing, before you use these travel papers to get your passport to flee to Europe, you got to do this one job for me. Remember, you promised. I told you I'd get you the travel papers. You told me you'd do a job for me. It's just gun running. I need you to, here's some money, buy a car, drive to Birmingham, buy this gun, meet me in Memphis. And then from there, you can do whatever you want. You've got the travel papers, you can flee. Our deal will be consummated at that point. So James Earl Ray told the Tennessean, the national newspaper, quote, I went to Memphis to deliver a rifle to this man called Raul, his handler. I had met with him twice while in Memphis at Jim's Grill. I haven't introduced that to you yet, but Jim's Grill is the business located on the bottom floor, the the ground floor of the rooming house that he's going to be staying in above. So he would go downstairs and eat. Anyway, he would meet with Raul at Jim's Grill. On the night of the shooting, I had left the rifle with Raul. So what he's saying is, I was ordered by Raul to meet him in Memphis with this rifle that I had purchased, that he gave me the money to purchase, that he told me to go purchase. And I met with him twice subsequent while I was in Memphis, staying at the rooming house, went downstairs and ate dinner at Jim's Grill and met with Raul twice. On the night of the shooting, I left the rifle with Raul. So it's pretty clear that Raul is James Earl Ray's handler. He's the one ordering James Earl Ray's movements. James Earl Ray, if left to his own devices, first of all, he'd still be in a Missouri prison if it was left to his own devices. But they have set this all in motion. They helped him escape. And now his goal is to get to Europe and eventually to Africa. He just needs these travel papers. He can't do it on his own. Enter Raul with money and travel papers. In exchange, go to Birmingham, buy this rifle, meet me in Memphis. And from there, you can go wherever you want to go. By the way, this white Mustang, remember, he fled from, after the shooting, he fled from Memphis to Atlanta. They found it in Atlanta parking lot. And after they wiped it clean, they found his fingerprints in it. They also discovered that the car was registered to, guess what? Eric S. Galt. So the travel papers are going to have his alias, Eric S. Galt. His car is going to be registered to somebody named Eric S. Galt. And of course, the only people who know who Eric S. Galt is, as far as the alias is concerned, are the military intelligence people who gave him that alias. This is going to be very convenient. It's JFK all over again. How did Dallas police get Lee Harvey Oswald's name 14 minutes after the shooting? It was an ONI officer who fed it into Dallas police, the alias and the name, and said, this is who you're looking for. Because military intelligence gave Lee Harvey Oswald his alias, just like military intelligence gave James Earl Ray his alias. He didn't think of Eric S. Galt on his own. Certainly didn't know an Eric S. Galt. The fact that he had top secret security clearance, that was all arranged independent of his knowledge and given to him through his handler, whom he thought was helping him. And it appeared that he was. But he was really just setting him up. Now, here's where things get a little interesting about this Raul character. When Pepper was investigating who this Raul character was, because this guy was in the shadows, and James Earl Ray, that's the only, I'm sure it wasn't his real name, right? But Pepper thought, if I could find this guy, that would be a real coup as far as my investigation is concerned. And he begins retracing his steps, following footsteps, trying to find anybody who might have information on this guy named Raul. According to Pepper, Raul was identified by showgirls who worked at Jack Ruby's Carousel Club as having been seen with Jack Ruby multiple times at the club before JFK's assassination. Uh-oh. Are you telling me that this intelligence figure who is serving as James Earl Ray's handler 5 years earlier, was seen with one of the main characters involved in the JFK assassination? He was at Jack Ruby's club multiple times, according to showgirls. When the FBI found the white Mustang and they searched it, papers fell out of the passenger door pocket, the pocket on the bottom of the door. When they looked at these papers, they found that the papers had Jack Ruby's Carousel Club phone number on them. Now, this is information that no one ever heard of. It's never been revealed. It didn't come out of trial or anything of that nature. According to witness Glenda Graybow, Raul was a gun runner from Houston, knew Jack Ruby well, and had some role in the JFK assassination. Oh my goodness. So what Pepper is discovering is that this guy, Raoul, who is serving now as James Earl Ray's handler, is not just some innocent guy that he ran into at a bar in Montreal. This guy is about as far away from home as you can get. His home is in Houston, but he's in Montreal because he's on assignment. He's been sent to meet James Earl Ray and serve as his handler and help set him up in this continuing setup that J. Hoover set in motion years earlier as the patsy for what's going to happen in Memphis. And why not? Because he has experience in this. He has, according to witnesses, knowledge of or a friendship with one of the central characters in the JFK assassination. It's current because the car was just purchased and the papers that fell out with his phone number on are in a car that was just purchased. And so this guy has, just like, it's interesting how connections like this tell a story and link one event to another. Here you have at least one person that we know of. Now there's more, but Pepper is finding this out in real time, that there is now a link from the assassination of JFK in 63 to the assassination of Martin Luther King in 68. And the link in this case is this character named Raul, whom James Earl Ray believes is trying to help him, but it's pretty obvious it's being used by intelligence to set him up. And he's giving him money, telling him to buy a gun, meet him in Memphis. So he's ordering his movements. He's ordering his behavior. He's paying for things. He's arranging travel papers with fake names, aliases that Ray is going to use to try to get a passport and flee the country. That ultimately is going to be used to arrest him. Because, as I said, military intelligence is very aware of what alias they gave him. According to James Earl Ray, as Pepper is learning in his investigation, Raul's instructions to Ray were as follows. On April 3 and 4, remember, he said, come to Memphis, meet me in Memphis, bring me the car, bring me the gun, meet me in Memphis. He tells him, I want you to rent the rooming house room. I want you to leave the travel bag, the bundle that was later discovered in front of Knight's. I want you to leave the travel bag with the rifle in the room. Now, put yourself in James Earl Ray's case. You don't realize you're being set up to be the assassin of Martin Luther King. You're just doing what your handler tells you to do. And it was your understanding that Raul was in the gun running business. So when he tells you to buy a gun and bring it to Memphis, that makes total sense, right? He also says to leave the white Mustang that you purchased in the parking area, which ended up being right in front of Jim's grill, for Raul to use later. It is technically Raul's car. He paid for it. And then leave the area. He said, rent the room, leave the bag, leave the bundle with the rifle, leave the car, leave the area. Those were his instructions to James Earl Ray. And then if you follow through and see what James Earl Ray did, he followed those instructions to the T. He did exactly what he was told. He leaves the rooming house with the bundle behind. He goes down to the white Mustang. This is what he's telling Pepper. Now, if it's just Ray's word, you could dispute that. It'd be he didn't have a lot of credibility in this matter, right? But we're going to see there's eyewitnesses who corroborate the story. So here's a picture of Jim's grill. The rooming house is upstairs. And according to Ray, he parked the white Mustang right out front of Jim's grill. So probably about where that truck is, or behind it or in front of it, whichever. So he leaves the rooming house. He goes down to the white Mustang and he remembers that the spare tire and the trunk was flat. And Raul has told him to leave the car there for me to use. And he's thinking, if I leave a car there without a spare and there's a problem, it's gonna complicate things for Raul. I better go get that spare fixed. So he drives gets in the white Mustang. He drives down the street, makes a sharp right-hand turn on Vance Avenue, and goes to a local filling station to get the flat tire repaired. Now, there were two eyewitnesses who left Jim's McGraw at the same time that James Earl Ray left. And they were able to corroborate the fact that the white Mustang was there. They were able to corroborate that a man matching the description of James Earl Ray got into the white Mustang. They noticed the white Mustang. They actually commented about it, which is why they remembered it. And they watched as James Earl Ray, or a man matching James Earl Ray's description, got into the car and drove away. They walked down the street towards Vance Avenue, the same direction that James Earl Ray was driving. Pepper said that one of the eyewitnesses said, "We almost got hit by the white Mustang. My buddy stepped out onto Vance Avenue. We were trying to cross the street, and the white Mustang appeared from behind us and made a sharp right-hand turn on the Vance Avenue and just about hit him. I had to pull him back onto the curb to prevent the white Mustang and James Earl Ray from hitting him. And we watched until he drove by, and then we crossed the street." These are the statements. Now, they did not just make these statements to Pepper. They made these statements to the police. And the reason Pepper was able to find their statements is because he found in the bottom of a file drawer, buried in the file materials at the state attorney general's office, the statements of these two eyewitnesses. And of course, none of these were ever turned over to defense counsel. But this shows or gives an alibi to James Earl Ray at the time of the shooting, because the shooting is going to happen while he's away. This gives an ironclad alibi to James Earl Ray that he was not even in the rooming house at the time. And of course, Earl Ray isn't arranging all this. He's just following instructions. His handler, Raul, told him, rent the room, leave the bundle in the room with the rifle, leave the car in front, and leave the area. The only thing he didn't obey exactly was leaving the car there. He was taking the car to get a spare fixed, and he was going to bring it back. But he did everything else he was supposed to be doing. He was following the instructions. And these two eyewitnesses gave a statement to police, essentially clearing him because he was not, and corroborating James Earl Ray's testimony, because he was not even in the rooming house at the time of the shooting. And this gets buried. This reminds me so much of the story of Lee Harvey Oswald. Remember, he's getting change from the bookkeeper, and she and he are she's sitting at her desk, he's standing in front of her desk, she's making change from at the time they heard the shooting. She tells the Warren Commission that story. The Warren Commission conflates her testimony with another lady who worked in the same building, who had the same last name, and two people instantly became one, and two stories became one, and they left the story that undercut the government narrative out, and they put the other lady's story in its place. In other words, they buried. This is how you conduct an investigation. You eliminate people based on their alibis. Both of these patsies have an alibi. Lee Harvey Oswald had an ironclad alibi that he was standing in front of the bookkeeper's desk getting change for the Coke machine at the time they heard the shooting. And he has her testimony to back it up. And it's not like she didn't talk to the Warren Commission. She gave them her testimony. They just chose to ignore it. They made a purposeful decision to bury her testimony and replace it with somebody else's. Just like here, there's two statements from two eyewitnesses that James Earl Ray was not in the rooming house at the time of the shooting. He was driving this white Mustang. They watched him leave Jim's Grill. They watched him get in the car. They watched him drive down Vance Avenue, and then they almost got hit by him. And they buried that testimony in the bottom of a file drawer, never turned it over to defense counsel. And when Pepper got to this point, he realized, okay, I'm dealing with somebody who had no knowing role in this. I am now convinced sufficiently that James Earl Ray is telling the truth. He had no knowing role in what was fixing to happen. All right, so the story continues. While he was at the gas station, Ray hears the sirens, because that's when the shooting happened. He was literally at the gas station and he realized at that point it's going to take too long to fix the fight. Now remember, this is an escapee from Missouri State Penitentiary. He's on the lam, he's on the loose, he's in the wind. The last thing he needs is to run into a policeman who's going to arrest him, send him back to Missouri State Pen. He doesn't need any problems with law enforcement, is my point. Realizing it was going to take too long to fix the flat and feeling the pressure to get that car back because Raul might need it, he leaves the gas station, returns the car to the rooming house. As he returns to the area, there's cops everywhere. And this is when he makes the decision to flee. He's an escaped convict. So he can't take any chances. So instead of dropping the car off at the rooming house like he'd been instructed, he just drives right on by and drives to Atlanta. And he learns about the assassination later. He just left town. He made it sort of an executive decision apart from Raul at that point. I got to get out of here. Something's gone down. I don't know what it is. I'm hearing sirens. I'm seeing policemen. It's right around my building where I'm staying. I'm an escapee. There's wanted posters out there for me. So he flees. All right. So if he wasn't the shooter, who was the shooter? This is the question that William Pepper had. Not that long ago, it seemed pretty convincing that my client or client to be was the shooter. He believed that himself for 9 years. You look at the evidence the government presented, it looked pretty convincing. So Pepper begins the search for the real shooter. If it's not Ray, who was it? And what he learned was that it was a Memphis police officer named Frank Strouser. Frank Strouser was known to be the best shooter on the force. He was Memphis police. He was an acknowledged racist. And by that, what I mean is people who knew him as a racist. That was the testimony of witnesses. And Pepper starts, so you say, well, how does Pepper learn this? Where does this information come from? So I introduced you to this character in the last episode, told you I would fill in the blanks later. So here we are, Lloyd Jowers. Lloyd Jowers is the owner of Jim's Grill, that restaurant. It's directly beneath the rooming house. I showed you a picture in an earlier slide. It's located, as I said, directly beneath the second floor rooming house. Lloyd Jowers comes to Pepper's attention years later. And it's through a series of bits of information he gets from others, and he eventually takes all that information and confronts him with it. And Lloyd Jowers confesses because Pepper had the goods on him. So I'm going to tell you what Lloyd Jowers confessed to, and then we'll get into how Pepper learned all this and used it to confront Jowers. So I hope you'll indulge me here. According to Jowers, his role in the assassination, remember now, it's his restaurant that's directly beneath the rooming house. It's front entrance outlets into Main Street, but it's back door outlets into the bushy area, which is right in front of, there's like a courtyard, and at the edge of the courtyard there, right above the retaining wall, all those bushes. And if you look out through those bushes, you're staring right at the Lorraine Hotel or motel. He said his role in this, and of course, Pepper learned this independently and confronted him with this, and Jowers confirmed it. His role was to retrieve the murder rifle from the shooter and dispose of it. And according to him and witnesses, whom we'll identify in a minute, he brought the still smoking murder rifle inside his restaurant through the back door, broke it down, and held it until it was later picked up by somebody else. In fact, he kept it underneath the bar in his, he broke it down in his kitchen, and he took it as it was broke down and kept it under his bar, waiting for it to be retrieved or picked up. So he was sort of he was an accomplice who was paid money. We'll talk about who paid him here in a minute, to participate and do this part of the plot. All right, so one of the persons that talked with Pepper and revealed what Lloyd Jowers had been involved in was a girl named Betty Spates. Betty Spates was Jowers' 17-year-old girlfriend at the time. Now you can see, it's kind of interesting. You look at Lloyd Jowers, he's an old fella, and he had a 17-year-old girlfriend, underage. She worked for him as a part-time waitress at Jim's Grill. She was sort of his love bunny. And she had a sister who worked there as well, also a waitress. And we'll get to her sister here in a minute. Anyway, Betty had come to the bar that night, according to what she told Pepper. She'd come to the bar that night to meet her boyfriend, and he wasn't there. He wasn't at the bar. She went to the back. He wasn't in the kitchen. She went to his office. He wasn't in the office. And she suspected that evidently this guy was quite a paramour. She suspected he was out back, floozing around with another one of his waitresses. And so she went out back to catch him in the act. I guess you could kind of go off in another direction here about this character, Lloyd Jowers, and why she would even suspect that to begin with. It must have happened before. Anyway, she goes and stands in the doorway, which she said the door was open. The back door was never open. But in this case, the door was open, which is why she suspected he was in the back. So she goes to the open door, stands in the doorway, and as she's standing there, she witnesses her boyfriend, Lloyd Jowers, who is sweating, and he's out of breath because he's running from the bush line, carrying this still smoking rifle, runs past her through the open door into the office area and starts breaking it down, the rifle. And while he's breaking down the rifle, stashing it under the counter, he looks at her and he asks her, quote, "Betty, you wouldn't do anything to hurt me, would you?" And Betty said, "No, Lloyd, I wouldn't." And until 1992, Betty kept this all to herself. Now, the big trial, the big civil case is in 99 when Pepper brings all this evidence forward. So that's 7 years prior. But this is a big piece of the puzzle. When Betty finally comes forward and tells what she saw happen on that day, moments after the shooting. And what her thought was that he had actually shot him. It was him who fired the shot. And that's why she kept it to herself all these years. She thought Lloyd Jowers, her boyfriend, had actually been the shooter. And when he asked her, "You wouldn't do anything to hurt me, would you?" she decided to keep it to herself. Finally, in 92, she tells Pepper what happened. And Pepper reassures her and tells her, "We don't think Lloyd Jowers was the shooter. We think he was retrieving the gun for someone else based on other information that Pepper had." And that convinced her to confirm what Pepper told her. James McGraw is another witness. He was a taxi driver who'd been called to the rooming house 10 minutes before the shooting to pick up a fare. It turns out his fare was Charles Stevens. Now, if you remember in the first day or the first episode, I told you Charles Stevens was the witness who stayed in 6B in the rooming house, who said that he kept hearing footsteps back and forth from 5B, where James Earl Ray was staying, to the common bathroom at the end of the hall, which was right next to his room. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Somebody from 5B was constantly using the bathroom. And then after the shot, he poked his head out and he said he saw somebody fleeing the scene carrying a bundle. And he said it was pretty obvious to me that they were just leaving the bathroom. It was the same guy. It was always in the bathroom from 5B. And that the shot happened from the bathroom, which is why the police went to the bathroom. So Charles Stevens is a key witness here. So this witness, James McGraw, is important because it confirms or denies. It's either going to corroborate Charles Stevens' story or it's not, because it just so happens 10 minutes before the shooting, he arrives to pick up Charles Stevens. So he goes to Jim's Grill, which is downstairs. He went up the stairs. The stairs were inside. You had to go inside Jim's Grill to go access the stairs to go upstairs to the rooming house to pick up his fare in 6B. It's Charles Stevens. And when he knocked on the door and he introduced himself to Stevens, he realized that Stevens, and this is in his words, was dead drunk. And so he declines to take Stevens anywhere until he sobers up, which calls into question, when you find out that Stevens was dead drunk, it seriously calls into question anything he had to say about what he witnessed at that moment in time, because we now have a witness that says Charles Stevens was drunk, and evidently pretty drunk. As McGraw went up the stairs, he noticed that the bathroom in the hall, the door to the bathroom in the hall, was open and the light was off. 5 minutes later, it took him 5 minutes to have this interaction with Stevens when he says, I'm not taking anywhere until you sober up. He retraces his step down the hall to access the stairs, and as he passed the bathroom again, he notices the door is still open and the light was still off, meaning Charles Stevens, who's the government is using as their star witness at this time to say that whoever was in 5B, turns out it was James Earl Ray, was back and forth, into the bathroom, out of the bathroom, into the bathroom, out of the bathroom, and that he witnessed him, the shot come, or heard the shot come from the bathroom, and witnessed him fleeing from the bathroom with a bundle under his arm. James McGraw is saying that's not true, because I was there, and both times when I noticed the bathroom, both coming and going, the bathroom door was open, was not shut, and the light was off. Also causing the question what Anschutz said, the other witness, who said he went to the bathroom, the door was locked, couldn't get in twice, and Stevens yelled through the door that whoever's in 5B is using the bathroom. It calls into question both of their statements. But it gets better. McGraw comes back to Jim's Grill to pick up another fare the next morning. And while he's waiting downstairs at Jim's Grill for his fare, Jowers, whom he evidently knew, showed him the weapon, saying, quote, and this is according to James McGraw, this is the weapon that killed King. So we now have some counter witnesses to the government witnesses. Charles Stevens and Anschutz were the two star witnesses for the government that pinned everything on James Earl Ray from the outset. You know, clearly when the police hear Charles Stevens' story, they're going to check real quick to find out who was in 5B. And when the rooming house manager says, well, if it's James Earl Ray, that's your suspect immediately. Well, now we're finding out that Stevens and Anschutz's story is just that, a story. James McGraw is saying that bathroom was unoccupied. Charles Stevens was dead drunk. I don't know how reliable a witness somebody is who's dead drunk. And furthermore, from Betty Spates, we're finding out that the fatal shot was not fired, or the shot was not fired from the rooming house, bathroom window in the rooming house. It was fired from the bushes, and she saw her boyfriend running back, breaking down the still smoking weapon. And if you needed further confirmation, James McGraw is saying that Lloyd Jowers told him, showed him the weapon, and told him this is the weapon that killed King. So that weapon that he was running with was the one that fired the shot that killed King. That's from the bushes. That's not from the rooming house bathroom window. We have two witnesses now to counter this narrative. Anyway, when Jowers is confronted with this evidence from James McGraw and Betty Spates, his girlfriend, former girlfriend, he admits his involvement in the plot. And he even agrees to allow himself to be the defendant in a wrongful death civil lawsuit that Pepper wants to file, which the whole point of that is to get discovery and to be able to present all this evidence that had never been presented before. Remember, they rushed through a guilty plea, but this is going to it's a civil trial. It's not a criminal trial. It's a civil lawsuit. And if you can prove wrongful death, that somebody else did it, and you can prove who did it and who was pulling the strings and get these people on the inside to testify, you can now shift the narrative or the blame to whom it really should fall on, and maybe eventually get James Earl Ray released on parole or released, maybe even a new trial. But you have to start with a civil trial. And that happens in 1999, which is a full 31 years later after the original assassination. But this is what Pepper has been doing. He's been for the first 9 or 10 years, he believed the story. James Earl Ray was the assassin. He was justifiably convicted, found guilty, sentenced to 99 years, case closed. Then they have that first meeting in 1978, 10 years after, and comes away from that thinking, I don't know, he might be innocent. And he goes to Memphis and he starts his own investigation. And from 78 to 88, he learns that, satisfying himself in his own mind, that James Earl Ray had no knowing role in the assassination. And in 88, he agrees, he says yes to be his defense attorney. And from 88 to 99, he continues his investigation to eventually link up with the Martin Luther King family and bring a wrongful death civil lawsuit against the city of Memphis and whomever else he names, with the objective being, I want to bring to light all this new evidence and possibly overturn this whole rush to judgment, this whole setup that's been put in place years earlier. And that, the wheels of justice grind slow. You've got to go through this methodical approach, and he's lost all his appeals. By the time we get to 99, it's almost a moot point as far as James Earl. It is a moot point as far as James Earl Ray is concerned, because he dies in 98. By 99, it's more about finding the truth about what actually happened, helping the King family move on, but also assigning blame where it was supposed to go. It's about getting at the truth by that point. As I said, James Earl Ray died in 98. But by 99, Pepper is now working on behalf of the King family as well as Ray. And so since Jowers has agreed and allowed himself to be the defendant in this lawsuit, he names Jowers as the defendant, sues him, and alleges a government conspiracy involving Jowers to assassinate Martin Luther King. Think about it. If you're Pepper, you have enough evidence already to say from these last two witnesses that Jowers was involved. Jowers confirmed it himself. I retrieved the weapon, broke it down, waited for it to be picked up. Obviously Jowers has involvement, and that's backed up by two witnesses, his girlfriend and the taxi driver, right? You also have witness or testimony and all kinds of evidence showing the FBI was involved in the decision. The FBI was involved in the setting up of the patsy. The FBI was involved in handing out the contracts, using the Dixie Mafia. And you have testimony. You're going to have testimony from Russell Adkins' son, Tyler Adkins. You're building a case that this was a government conspiracy, from the decision to kill King, from the decision to set up Ray as a patsy, from the decision to give Ray an alias and assign a handler to him. This is all the government working, and they're working in concert with mafiosos. The New Orleans crime boss, Carlos Marcello, who hands it to Frank Liberto in Memphis, and he hands out cash to people like Jowers to do their part. So it's a combination. It's a conspiracy involving the FBI, military intelligence, New Orleans crime family, Memphis, Dixie Mafia, and some of these locals that happen to be in the right place at the right time, like Lloyd Jowers. It's a conspiracy, which is why he alleges a government conspiracy involving Jowers to assassinate Martin Luther King. He hauls in 70 witnesses over 30 days in front of a Memphis judge and a Memphis jury. In a taped deposition, Jowers testified that Frank Liberto, the underboss that was handed the contract by Carlos Marcello, his front was that he was a produce dealer. They always have a front. Carlos Marcello claimed over and over again that he was a tomato salesman. They always have a front, right? Frank Liberto paid him $100,000 for his role in the plot. So he says, I got 100 grand to be the guy who stashed the weapon, broke it down, and waited for it to be picked up. 100 grand for 5 minutes of work. Now, this was backed up by, I told you, Betty Spates had a sister. Her name was Bobby Balfour. She was also a waitress at Jim's Grill. And she said she witnessed Jowers hide $100,000 cash in an unused stove in his restaurant. So you have a corroborating witness to say, well, I don't know where he got the $100,000 cash, but I know he had it because he hid it in the stove. And Jowers is saying, I got it from Frank Liberto for my role in the plot. And you say, well, what's all any of this got to do with Strouser? You started this off about Strouser. Well, according to Jowers, again, this is in his tape deposition. He's the one that introduces the name of Strouser, by the way. Strouser went down the back stairs of the rooming house, that you can see here, with his spotter. He even named the spotter. The spotter was also a Memphis police officer. His name was Captain Earl Clark. They went out into the courtyard from the back stairs where the bushes were, and that's where they met Jowers. And according to Jowers, Frank Strouser took the shot from the bushes directly across from the Lorraine Motel. Now, it was again, the Lorraine Motel, if you've been there, it sits down in a kind of like a valley. It's real low. And then you have the street, which is higher than the hotel. It's about equal to the beginning of the second floor. And then you have this big retaining wall that holds up all the ground above Main Street or Mulberry Street. And that's where these buildings are, and that's where the bushes were. So if you take a shot from that bushy area, as described by Lloyd Jowers, you are looking down on that balcony, second floor balcony of Lorraine Motel. You're above it. You're on top. That retaining wall is about 6 to 8 feet high. It seemed like it was taller than me. I'm 6'5", and it was taller than me. So you're up in the air a good ways, and you're already above the Lorraine Motel before the street level is above the Lorraine Motel. Then you add 6 or 8 feet to it, and you're sitting on top of that. So it would stand to reason that it would be a downward trajectory if you're shooting from the bushes, which is exactly what the autopsy showed. So anyway, Lord Jowers says Frank Strouser took the shot from the bushes. After the shot, he said they all went in opposite directions. Clark went down over the wall, which is going to be corroborated here in a minute. He ran north to Mulberry Street, where he was picked up by a police car and disappeared. Strouser went off in the direction towards the courtyard, went towards Main Street without anything in his hands. He just walked away because the guy who was responsible to tear down the gun was Jowers. And that's when Betty Spates comes to the back door, looks out with her hands on her hips, sure that her boyfriend is out in the back cheating with one of the other waitresses, and instead sees him breaking down his still smoking gun, running towards her, sweating profusely, breathing hard, runs into the kitchen and starts breaking it down. And that's when he turns to her and says, Betty, you wouldn't do anything to hurt me, would you? So he said, well, we're going to need more evidence than Lloyd Jowers, a co-conspirator in the plot, naming Frank Strouser as the shooter. Lenny Curtis was a janitor at the Memphis police rifle range. He was deposed by Pepper. And in his deposition, he said the following. A, Strouser was practicing with this specially delivered rifle almost the entire day of April 4th. Martin Luther King was not shot until 6:01 p.m. So when he says all day, it's pretty much his entire shift. He spent practicing with this new rifle. It's a specially delivered rifle. He's down there at the rifle range practicing, and Lenny Curtis saw him. In fact, he was close enough, he overheard Strouser making comments, including, quote, King's going to get his head blown off, and other racist, derogatory comments. And Lenny's just working, mopping, sweeping, changing, emptying the trash, noting this, Then he watched Strouser leave with the rifle at 3 p.m. And he's just convinced that Strouser's up to no good. And he was so convinced, he went to the phone and he tried to call his pastor and several times and was unsuccessful each time in trying to reach his pastor. He was going to tell him what he'd seen and warn him. He also made contact with a Union Hall receptionist, and he was trying to get the attention of somebody in particular. And he told the lady at the desk, it's a matter of life and death. And the Union Hall receptionist asked, whose life? And he responds, I think these people are planning to kill Dr. King. So Dr. Pepper finds out about this interaction that he has with this Union Hall receptionist. So he tracks him down, and this is the story that Lenny Curtis tells him. Yeah, I watched him. He was shooting most of April 4th. He kept making these comments, kept saying this stuff, and then he left at 3 in a hurry in a buddy's car, a fireman's car. I saw him leave, and he says, I tried to call my pastor. I couldn't get a hold of my pastor. I went to the Union Hall, was trying to get a hold of somebody there. I talked to that Union Hall receptionist. That's what I said. So Pepper says, well, what happened after that? And Lenny Curtis says, well, after the assassination, I think Strouser got suspicious of me because he started following me around. He said, one time I looked outside my house and there was an unmarked car and Strouser was in it, and there was a rifle nest in the back window pointing at my kitchen window. He said, another time when I entered the house, I was a smoker. I went to light my cigarette and I smelled gas. Somebody had turned the gas on in my house. He said, every time I turned around, Strouser was surveilling me. He says, the spookiest was one time he arrived at my house right before my shift started, picked me up, and we went the long way to work through a wooded route. And the entire time he was pumping me for information about who I thought killed King. And so he said, I just played dumb because I'm pretty convinced if I had said the wrong thing, he'd have killed me. And he said, he was clearly suspicious of what I knew. But it gets better. Solomon Jones was the Memphis taxi driver that during the time King was in Memphis served as his chauffeur. He was sitting at the Lorraine Motel when Martin Luther King was shot. He was just sitting there waiting to chauffeur him. He maintained, and this is a statement he gave to the police immediately after, that the shot came from the bushes between the rooming house and the motel. All right, so now we have another bushes witness, right? We already have the other taxi driver. We have who said it couldn't have come from the bathroom because he saw the bathroom was empty both times he saw it and the light was out. Door was wide open. We have Betty Spates witnessing what she saw. We have Lloyd Jowers saying that the shot came from Frank Strouser from the bushes. And now we have Solomon Jones corroborating all that. He said that he witnessed, if you're sitting at the Lorraine, you're staring straight up at the bushes and that retaining wall. He witnessed the spotter, Earl Clark, hop down from the wall and run to the waiting police car. It happened right in front of him. Seconds later, a New York Times reporter who was in Memphis, staying at the Lorraine, reporting on everything Martin Luther King was up to, come running out along with a housekeeper from their rooms. They heard the shot, and they too saw a figure run from the bushes. So all three of them saw the same thing. Earl Clark ran from the bushes. When Jones, when Earl Caldwell saw Jones, he asked him, what did you see? Jones reported the exact same thing. What I just said. He said, I saw that the shot came from the bushes. I saw that guy, Earl Clark, jump down and run off, get picked up by a police car. And Earl Caldwell went right back to his room and typed it all up in his old typewriter to create a record so he wouldn't forget anything. That night, Dixie Mafia killed Solomon Jones. He had very damaging information that tied to the Memphis Police Department. Harold Cornbread Carter was another incriminating witness. He was an older gentleman who was lying in the thicket and drinking wine with a friend, Dude Wheeler. And they were watching, according to them, according to Carter, they were, quote, watching the big doings at the Lorraine. When the wine ran out, Carter told Dude Wheeler, go get us some more. So off goes Wheeler. According to Caldwell, whom Carter talked to, Carter was laying in a box in the bushes when he heard someone coming through. At first, he thought it was his friend coming back with the wine, but then this fellow walked right past him. According to Carter, the fellow took his position as Frank Strouser from there and he shot Dr. King. I don't know how many feet he was away, but he was watching this whole thing, being quiet, and he sees him with the gun and he sees him shoot Dr. King. After he told Caldwell this story, Carter went to the authorities and told them the same story. Hey, I saw the guy. He was in the bushes right a couple feet from me. I saw him shooting. But because he was drunk, they ignored it. It's interesting. The drunk guy who was a tenant, Charles Stevens, they listened to. But this guy, they said they smelled alcohol in his breath. They said he was drunk, so they ignored his testimony. So that was a way to discredit him. But now he did tell his story to Caldwell. This is Earl Caldwell, that New York Times reporter. He was on the scene. He took Solomon Jones' testimony. He took Harold Cornbread Carter's statements. He typed them up on his old Royal typewriter. Minutes later, after the shooting, Caldwell got an invite. It was totally unexpected. It's a New York Times reporter, to fly on the airplane that took King's body back to Atlanta. So he did. He went with him. When he returned to Memphis a day later to pick up all his belongings, he noticed the place had completely changed. Quote, they totally altered the crime scene. The bushes had been cut within an inch of the ground. A Tom, Dick, or Harry could not go in and do that. So he obviously is going to take note of what happens of the bushes, because that's where, according to everybody he talked to, and even according to what he saw himself when he come running out with the housekeeper from the Lorraine Motel, he saw someone flee from the bushes area. But when he talked to Solomon Jones and Harold Cornbread Carter, they saw somebody fire from there. So they saw what he came out split second later and saw the after effects of. So they saw the whole thing. He saw the partial. And everything he had learned was that the shooter was in the bushes. So when he comes back to pick up his things, he notices the bushes are gone. By the way, the FBI did not request an interview with Earl Caldwell. It didn't even examine his manuscript until 1999, which is right before the civil trial, 31 years after the assassination. This is how you rig investigations. You choose who you're going to call to testify. You choose what witnesses you're going to listen to. And if you didn't hear it, it didn't happen. So they've already dismissed Harold Cornbread Carter because he was, quote, drunk. They choose not to interview him. He was too credible, right? Solomon Jones turns up dead that night, so they can't go talk to him, even though he did talk to local authorities. You see what I'm saying? This is how you rig an investigation. You just choose carefully who you're going to listen to and who you're not going to listen to. Now, Lloyd Jowers has told this story. These depositions from Harold Cornbread Carter, from the taxi driver, from Solomon Jones, all these different places, from Earl Caldwell, all of these 70 witnesses come forward in this civil trial. It took the jury 59 minutes to find that, quote, James Earl Ray did not kill Martin Luther King, number one. Number two, Lloyd Jowers had participated knowingly in the plot, but that he had a small percentage of involvement. He literally picked up the gun, broke it down, and held it. The major perpetrators, according to the jury, were, quote, officers of the United States government, state of Tennessee, the city of Memphis. That is a documented court finding as a result of a Memphis jury and a Memphis judge. It reminds me of the JFK case where Marita Lorenz, there's that civil lawsuit where Marita Lorenz is the star witness and identifies E. Howard Hunt as a knowing participant in JFK assassination, which means the CIA was involved. And the jury found against Hunt. He was suing for defamation. And they ruled against him and said, no, that newspaper that pinned you as one of the participants in the CIA, as one of the participants in the assassination of JFK was correct. They didn't defame you. They're right. You didn't participate. The CIA was involved. And it was based on testimony of Marita Lorenz. Again, it was a civil trial. It was not a criminal trial. And just like in this case, try to find any story from a newspaper or anything about this 1990 civil trial in Memphis. It's almost impossible to find any information about it. It was completely blackballed, blacklisted. It was a news blackout, just like there was in the Marita Lorenz trial. Both civil trials got scant attention because even though both of them found against the government narrative, you'd think that would be a huge story. It's not a huge story because it countered the narrative and they blacked it out. But thankfully, we know about it because of the work of Dr. William Pepper. All right, what happened next? This is what William Pepper found out after the fact, after the shooting, that, in his words, stunned him. Couldn't believe it. The assumption was that the bullet killed Martin Luther King. He died on the scene. But he ran into some other witnesses that destroyed that narrative. All right, so we've already established that Martin Luther King was shot at 6:01. He arrived at St. Joe Hospital at 6:15. Now, that was a quick response time, and the reason being is because fire station number 2 there in Memphis is directly across the street from the Lorraine Hotel. So you see here, I've circled it. There's Mulberry Street separating Lorraine from the fire station. The smaller circle is the fire station. You can see it. It looks over the crime scene. So it was a very quick response time. And he is pronounced dead at 7:05 p.m. Let me introduce to you the doctor who treated Martin Luther King. His name is Dr. George Brain Bland Sr., pictured here. He's the head of neurosurgery at St. Joe Hospital. He's also, the family doctor of the Russell Adkins Sr. family. That's the Dixie Mafia family that's been in cahoots all this time with J. Edgar Hoover. And so you can kind of guess where this is going. According to Tyler Adkins, who was present, he overheard Dr. Bland had visited his father at the home weeks earlier, during which Tyler overheard Dr. Bland tell his father, this is before his father died, Russell, quote, "Please be sure that if he's not killed by the shot, make sure they send him to St. Joseph's so we can make sure he does not leave alive." So Martin Luther King is shot at 6:01. At 6:15, he's wheeled into the St. Joe emergency room, and a team begins working on him. They are interrupted by Dr. Bland, who comes into the emergency room accompanied by 2 men in suits. According to witnesses, whom I'm going to name here in a second, Dr. Bland ordered the team to, quote, "stop working on that N-word and let him die." This is St. Joe Hospital in 1968. Her name is Lula Mae Shelby. I've got her pictured here, circled. She was a surgical nurse on the scene in that emergency room. She was among the group that was ordered to leave by Dr. Bland. As she's leaving, she observes Dr. Bland and the 2 men in suits spitting in Martin Luther King's face. After which she observed Dr. Bland take a pillow and put it over Martin Luther King's head and face and suffocate him. Now, when Pepper asked her, would he have died from the gunshot, she said probably. But I am completely sure, she said, that he was not dead when we left his side. And Dr. Bland took matters into his own hand, made sure he was dead. The son of Lula Mae Shelby is pictured here. His name is Johnton Shelby. And he became the witness of what his mother saw because Lula Mae died and took that, never was able to testify directly to Pepper what she saw, but she told her family. And then I may have misspoke earlier and said that Lula Mae was talking to Pepper. It was actually Johnton who was talking to Pepper, telling Pepper what his mom had told them, family. He was blind, he was diabetic, he was in very poor health. He died young. But before he died, and after his mom died, in a videotaped deposition, Johnton testified to Pepper what his mother had told them, the entire family, years earlier. She said, quote, somebody was saying, I think she said somebody said they found a slight pulse. And that's when the man walked in the door and said, quote, everybody stop working. I mean, you all stop. Let that N-word die. And he continues, his mom identified this person as Dr. Breen Bland. The man was Dr. Breen Bland. He and others left in the room ritualistically began to cough up phlegm and spit onto the unfortunate on the gurney. Bland then proceeded to remove a tracheal tube and then place a pillow over the patient's head to extinguish his life. That is the testimony of Johnton Shelby, the son of Lula Mae Shelby, the surgical nurse who was in the room when all this happened. Now, this deposition was held until after Johnton died. That was the stipulation that Pepper could not go public with this information until after Johnton died. What Nurse Shelby's story and Tyler Adkins' story about Dr. Breen Bland does is they corroborate each other. Tyler Adkins said, Bland visited my dad. I overheard them talking. Bland said, if he doesn't die, make sure that after he's shot, if he doesn't die, make sure they bring him to St. Joe so I can make sure he doesn't leave alive. All right. Lula Mae Shelby told her family that she was the last one in the room and heard Bland come in and said, let that blankety blank die. And she saw him pull out the tracheal tube, put the pillow over his face, and smother him. So this is a picture, bottom right there, of Breen Bland playing the part of a charitable person giving money to a local, looks like a Catholic priest, Catholic school, whatever. But and there is the funeral announcement for Lula Mae Shelby after she died. And so we have witnesses now. This is why Pepper was able to win this case in 59 minutes, because we have witnesses every step of the way that prove that the conspirators include the FBI. And we've got stories of Hoover and Tolson working together with the Dixie Mafia and with former FBI agent and current Memphis Fire and Police Director Frank Holloman to set the stage for the assassination in Memphis, including the setup of the patsy, the luring of Martin Luther King to Memphis, the murder of those two garbage workers. That was Frank Holloman's doing. The payment for the psychological profile, for the facilitation of James Earl Ray's escape from the Missouri prison. I mean, on and on and on. The FBI was involved up to and including the fact that Hoover told in an interoffice memo all of his surveillance to stop on MLK 2 days before the assassination. I mean, every step of the way, Hoover was involved. Of course, his number two was Tolson. And his guy on the ground there in Memphis was Frank Holloman. We know the Dixie Mafia was involved because of the story that Tyler Adkins tells, and also Lloyd Jowers. And Tyler telling, informing on his daddy, Russell Atkins, and what his family role in all this. We also know that Dr. Bland, who was the family doctor of Russell Atkins, was involved. So by extension, I doubt that Dr. Bland was Dixie Mafia, but he was involved with the Dixie Mafia family. And we also know U.S. military intelligence was involved. John Downing probably was the one who arranged James Earl Ray's alias, Eric S. Galt, and through his handler, Raul, who was working for him, gave Eric S. Galt the alias to James Earl Ray with the promise that that would be sufficient to get him travel papers or a passport to flee the country. So you got the conspiracy involving FBI, Dixie Mafia, U.S. military intelligence. And Pepper gets, in the course of his investigation, finds out that there were also military snipers on the scene. It's kind of interesting how that worked out. He was actually contacted. He didn't reach out to this guy. This guy reached out to him. There was a naval intelligence officer who contacted Pepper and to tell him that there was an 8-man military sniper team in Memphis on the day of Martin Luther King's assassination. It just like when JFK was assassinated, we find out all of these CIA assassins, all these assassins who had worked for the S Force were on the ground that day. What are the odds that an assassination would take place with all these assassins there and they not be involved? So Pepper concluded the same. So he decided, I want to find out who these snipers are. And so he found out that there were 2 snipers and a spotter that were chosen again by the same military intelligence guy, Downing. And they were sent from Camp Shelby in Mississippi in the early morning hours of April 4th, 1968. Now, this information comes from this O&I officer. He said it was an 8-man sniper team. They came from Camp Shelby. And so through that information, Pepper was able to determine who they were. These snipers were briefed at 4:30 a.m., shown pictures of the targets. The targets, there was actually 2 of them. The targets were Martin Luther King and an associate of his named Andrew Young, whom the big shots in Washington were afraid of because he was a good fundraiser and he appealed to labor. He looked like a possible successor to Martin Luther King. So we'll take them both out at the same time. These snipers, he couldn't find them. And together with the O&I officer, they discovered that these snipers had fled afterwards to Mexico out of fear that they might get caught up in a cleanup operation, which means they themselves might be taken out. So Pepper wants to meet with them, but they won't meet with Pepper because Pepper at that time is representing James Earl Ray. And they're afraid that he's a plant by the government or somebody, and he'll expose them. But they will meet with the O&I officer. So the O&I officer meets with these snipers and this spotter and was able to get confirmations of the following information. This is a picture of the fire station that is directly across from Lorraine Motel. And according to the spotters and the snipers and the spotter, they were in the 2nd floor, what they call the dormitory, which if you see I should have put a circle there. If you see my cursor, that's the 2nd floor dormitory, and there's the corner window that they said they were in. The Lorraine is in this direction. Follow my cursor, right across the street. That 2nd floor window is a perfect vantage point. They didn't shoot. According to them, they were informed the last minute that they were merely there as backups, which was suspicious to them because they had been told who the targets were and informed when they left Camp Shelby that they were the they were going to be the team number one, the sniper team that took him out, or took both of them out. But when they got there, they were informed that they were backups. And then after the shooting, they were ordered to leave the scene after the shooting. Now, what that means is that if whoever shoots from the bushes misses, then they would have been ordered at that point to take him out as backups. But because the guy from behind the bushes didn't miss, and it was a fatal wound, they didn't need the backups to fire, so they ordered the backups to leave the scene. Well, the backups fled to Mexico. That's what they did. And in the course of this meeting with the ONI officer on behalf of Dr. Pepper, the snipers and the spotter also confirmed that there were photographers sent also by John Downing on top of the roof of the fire station. So if I go back to that picture, right above them, same cursor, you have photographers. These are PSYOP photographers taking photos of everything that happens. According to these snipers, the photographers got everything. They got the balcony of the Lorraine, they got the bushes, they got the shooter, they got the surrounding streets, they got the witnesses, anybody that might have to be dealt with later. And so Pepper said, well, I'd like to get my hands on those photographs. So the ONI officer continued to push to meet with these photographers. In the course of this meeting with these photographers, they're trying to haggle out an agreement to get their hands on these photos. The ONI officer had mistakenly used his real name when he bought a ticket to this location down in Mexico where he was going, and he was followed by the FBI. And when they were meeting, the FBI surveillance team stuck a camera out a window, and and these photographers saw him. They thought the ONI officer had set them up and laid an ambush for them, a trap. So they fled. And before they fled, the ONI officer was able to get them to confirm that the shooter in the bushes whom they photographed was not James Earl Ray. And then that unfortunate situation happened where the photographers saw the camera from the FBI surveillance team. They fled. So as a result, Pepper was unable to secure the photographs when this meeting got cut off the way it did. But nevertheless, what he learned was that there was, in addition to the government involvement at the extent that he already knew, which was to plan the assassination, to plan the patsy, to pay everybody, to offer contracts, to lure Martin Luther King to Memphis, all the things that they were involved in. And then, of course, to control the investigation afterwards. The military and its involvement, in addition to the fact that it handled all the alias part of it and they sent in a sniper team to be the backup. They sent in the military intelligence sent in a photographer team to photograph everything for PSYOP purposes. So there is clear coordination here between the FBI and the military and, of course, the Dixie Mafia. They're all working together here. And poor James Earl Ray is the patsy who's been set up, the dupe that got set up going all the way back to 1966 when they did a psychological profile at his prison, determined he was the guy perfectly suited to be the patsy in a killing. It goes all the way back to J. Edgar Hoover's original assignment that he gave to the Missouri Commissioner of Prisons. And the payment of $25,000 cash to the warden at the Missouri Penitentiary to facilitate his escape. He'd been set up all that time. And then the Raul, the handler, and all of the movements that Raul was able to manipulate on James Earl Ray's behalf, saying, here, I'm here to help you. I'm going to get you travel papers. I'm going to get you a passport so you can flee. Here's some money. Go buy a gun. Here's some money. Go buy a car. Meet me in Memphis on this day. Here's some instructions about your time in Memphis. It was all coordinated. It was all set up. It was all arranged in advance. And this is why and how William Pepper in the 1999 civil trial was able to get a guilty verdict against Lloyd Jowers for his minimal participation in the plot. He did get $100,000 from Frank Roberto, but the principles as spelled out by the jury was the government, the United States government, state of Tennessee, the city of Memphis. And the patsy and all that was James Earl Ray. So this is why I say William Pepper is so key in this. He's the one guy who doggedly pursued the facts and came up with witness after witness after. I mean, in the 99 trial, he presented 70 witnesses. And each one corroborated the other. He had layers upon layers of corroborations and support for a story. The one regret that he had, if you ever listen to him talk, read his book, is he didn't get his hands on those photos. He wanted those photos bad, but they got spooked and they ran off, and he was never able to get close enough again to get access to those photos. But I think we can see what we learned so far, that there is at least a case, pretty convincing case. And it's interesting, when you first heard the government evidence, you say, oh, the evidence is overwhelming. The case is strong. It's ironclad. It's an open and shut case against James Earl Ray. Then you hear the evidence that Dr. Pepper came up with, found. And pretty quickly, all that evidence that looks so ironclad, so open and shut, so convincing, just falls apart quickly. It's the same thing happened in the JFK case. The evidence just fell apart, which is why they couldn't have a trial. But here again, if you have an honest trial, this evidence, if you're allowed to present it, or if it's not buried, if you allow the defense to actually conduct a case, this evidence is going to fall apart. Now, it's interesting because in this case, a lot of the evidence came years later. Betty Spates didn't come forward in 92, right? The taxi drivers, this is in the 90s, 25 years later. And that's when he was able, Pepper, to take what he knew and confront Lloyd Jowers, and Lloyd Jowers confirmed everything. That wasn't until the mid-90s. As I said, the wheels of justice turn slow. The truth is so much tougher to get at than the lie. The lie is easy. The cover story is easy. It's been prepared in advance in most cases. The truth, you have to go unwind. You have to get, it's a painstaking process. And that's what William Pepper did, his contributions to this case. So we're not done. That's only step 3. That's only episode 3. We got 3 more episodes to continue this story. And I know you're going to have a hard time believing this, but the story gets better. The ballistics, when we get into Judge Joe Brown, we see, as a result of ballistics and his expertise in that matter, that gun that they said that was James Earl Ray's gun, that they said killed Martin Luther King, could not have fired the shot that killed Martin Luther King. So not only does he have an alibi, as backed up by 2 eyewitnesses who saw him driving away from the scene in the white Mustang, the gun they say they pinned on him as saying that it was the assassin's rifle, could not have fired the fatal shot. We'll get into that next. But until then, I hope everybody has a blessed day. Thank you.